All right, welcome to Grand Prix Omaha. This is round 13. We have Brad Nelson, the only undefeated at 12-0, playing Temur Marvel. We saw get to see some of his matches yesterday. And Sam Pardee, also a very notable player at 11-1, playing Black-Green Constrictor. So at this point, Brad needs to pick up presumably a draw in the next 3 rounds to make top 8, but no one else can draw with him right now. He's the only undefeated. So Sam is looking to win this round, and that would leave Sam and Brad both at 12-1. Again, looking like in good shape for top 8, but they've got a battle here. And it's higher stakes even for Sam, but both players very much want to win this match.
Exactly. Yeah, we can't write it in stone yet that Brad's going to be in our top 8, but he's in excellent position. And I'd agree with you that this match is more important for Sam's prospects than for Brad's.
So Sam getting started here with Traverse the Ulvenwald. One of the setup cards. And in the beginning of the game, it plays as just an extra land, but then, of course, later it becomes much more powerful.
This has proven to be, perhaps the most important matchup of the weekend of Temur Marvel against Black-Green Constrictor. And it's great to see, one of the top players in the tournament on each side of the matchup just doing great with their weapon of choice.
Yeah, it's a matchup we like to focus on here. And Nissa, Voice of Zendikar, countered by Censor, one of the early interactive spells. Got a Rogue Refiner on Brad's side of the board, so things pretty much going according to plan for Marvel. Censor into Rogue Refiner against an opponent with nothing in play is a pretty good start, especially since the Black-Green deck is a bit more of the beatdown here.
Yeah, that's just the start Brad wants to see, especially being able to tag something with Censor when you're on the draw. Steals the tempo back in your favor, and we see Brad being able to add to the board first. That's a great position, given that his deck is also probably stronger in the mid and late game.
Tireless Tracker from Sam does give him a pretty good threat. It's the mono-green Rogue Refiner. But it gets taken down by Harness Lightning, again leaving Brad in good shape on board here.
And that key 6 energy, so he's ready to go with Aetherworks Marvel if he ever draws it. But Sam, keeping the pressure on.
Yeah, Virgil's Gearhulk as an 8/8, fairly effective threat, especially since the Temur Marvel deck, they do have Harness Lightning, and actually Brad has enough energy to take it down with Harness Lightning, but it is still a fair amount of pressure. But looks like Brad does have the Aetherworks Marvel here. Reed, what is he looking to Marvel into?
I'd say Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger. That's going to be the best hit on a board state like this. And yet, as you mentioned, Harness Lightning would have been one of the better cards to cast from his hand, but once he spends the 6 energy on the Marvel activation, hitting Harness Lightning won't be able to kill a Gearhulk. So he's looking, of course for Ulamog, but next best would be probably something just to recharge his energy. That's easy.
And game 1 goes to Brad Nelson. He Aetherworks Marvels into Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger, exiling 2 of Sam's lands, presumably, and then blocking the Virgil's Gearhulk. So that'll be game 1. We'll be back with game 2 after these messages. Prix Omaha. Luis Scott Vargas here with Reed Duke, and we just saw Brad Nelson take game one in this matchup against Sam Pardee. Brad playing Temur Marvel. He successfully Ulamogged on turn 5, and that was enough for Sam.
Yep. As we alluded to earlier, this is a key matchup in Standard, and I'm sure both players have probably played this exact matchup several times on the weekend. They know what they're doing with their sideboard. The card I've been most impressed with on the Temur Marvel side in this matchup is Confiscation Coup. Brad has one copy in his sideboard, which I would really predict to come in. And on the black-green side, it's mostly going to be the Hand Disruption that changes Transgress the Mind and Dispossess.
I know talking to Eric Froelich, who played Temur Marvel to a top 8 at Pro Tour Monquette, he said he wishes he had more Confiscation Coups. He said that he thought that card was very, very good. All right, taking a live look in here, Timothy Ealey playing Temur Marvel. Speaking of which, there's an Aetherworks Marvel playing against William Craddock playing Temur Energy. So this is the kind of like aggro deck that replaces Marvel and Ulamog with aggressive creatures. So Timothy's spinning the wheel here, and no Eldrazi in sight. Looks like a Rogue Refiner is going to be one of his better options.
Yeah. We saw what Marvel activations look like at 12-0. This is what they look like at 10-2.
Yes, that is exactly how you can tell the difference. Brad is marveling much harder than Timothy is here. You don't want to see the 9-3 activations.
So pretty cool board state here. William Craddock playing the non-Marvel Temur deck, and he's established just the kind of board state he wants with a variety of utility creatures and a Planeswalker to give him long-term advantage.
And it looks like he might actually just have lethal in play here, with Chandra Torch of Defiance representing 2 damage and just a whole slew of attackers. So Timothy really did need to hit an Ulamog there. And unfortunately for him, he was not able to do so. So looks like William Craddock's going to take a game 1 here with the non-Marvel Marvel deck getting in there. And we're back to our main match. Looks like Sam has kept his opening hand, and Brad is mulliganing here.
So this is the situation that most favors Sam over the course of the match, getting to be on the play in a sideboarded game when his opponent's taking a mulligan.
Unfortunately, not a strategy you can rely on, having your opponent mulligan. Unless, of course, they're facing me in a tournament. But I've cleverly avoided that for the past year. So, Brad looking at seems like a pretty solid 6 there. He's got the Confiscation Coup, Censor, and Attune, and a Rogue Refiner. So a nice little curve. Attune with Ether, into Censor, into Rogue Refiner, with a Confiscation Coup on 5.
It's funny, Luis. Attune with Ether is such an unassuming card, but it really feels like just exactly what the energy players want to have in their opening hand to, make sure that all their colors run smoothly. They get a nice free boost of energy to start the game. That's the card that makes the difference between a fine start and a great start.
There are a lot of cards in the Temur Energy deck, like the Marvel deck, that you could imagine the deck working without them, like Whirler Virtuoso. Not even all versions play it, like Brad is not even playing it. It seems like Attune with Ether is not one of those cards. If Attune didn't exist, these decks would look dramatically different.
I agree.
An early Grim Flayer for Sam, and Brad without a Harness Lightning, that Grim Flayer is going to get dangerously close to Delirium every time it hits. So this is a kind of interesting spot. Sam's looking at 2 removal spells, Never to Return and Grasp of Darkness. He ended up keeping Never to Return. What is your stance on removal in this matchup?
Well, it's not, Never Return is not the card I would say is the best in an objective sense in this matchup, but it's an important tool to have access to. And now that Sam has already done what he needs to do in sticking a big threat, a 4 toughness threat, now having removal to back it up is just what he wants.
And that Never to Return does take out the Rogue Refiner. Also gives Sam Delirium, so he gets to hit for 4 with that Grim Flayer.
A fairly classic play pattern with Grim Flayer in all the formats that it's legal is, getting through and continuing to stack the top of your library with removal spells to continue getting through.
And Sam keeps all 3 cards with Grim Flayer. So, not a great sign for Brad.
Though Brad is holding that card that I mentioned earlier, Confiscation Coup, the best out to kind of any sticky situation that the Temur Marvel player is going to face in this matchup, at least. He can both have a big swing in terms of card advantage while also relieving the pressure of a big attacker like Grimflayer.
Though, funnily enough, that might actually shrink when it moves over to Brad's side of the board, depending on his delirium count. Looks like he's at
Good
3
point.
right now. So Brad has Tireless Tracker in hand. It looks like he also found a Harness Lightning, and it looks like he's going to opt to just go with the Harness Lightning, the much safer play. What would Brad be worried about when he's debating between Harness Lightning and Tireless Tracker there?
Well, should be thinking about Blossoming Defense, and that's potentially part of the reason Brad cast it on his own turn. But the Tireless Tracker is not a super appealing play on that turn because it can't successfully block the Grimflayer. Not for a turn, at least.
So Sam gets to transgress Tireless Tracker here, leaving Brad with all lands and a Confiscation Coup. And that puts Sam in a kind of interesting position. He knows that Brad has Confiscation Coup, so he's incentivized not to play anything too good to steal.
Yeah, that's a play he can more comfortably make if he knows he has a extra discard spell either in his hand or stacked on top of his library. We'll see if that's the case. Otherwise, he's going to have to navigate this game in a pretty careful way.
I also believe that Sam left an Obnixilis Reignited on top of his deck when he hit with Grimflayer, so that Planeswalker does a pretty good job fighting Confiscation Coup because those two cards don't interact, and you just keep drawing cards with Obnixilis.
His goal in taking Tireless Tracker is sort of to stagnate Brad's draw. Brad, the Marvel player stuck with just lands and a reactive card, and what the Marvel deck usually wants to do is have a lot of, velocity and seeing cards in its library. You want to draw Rogue Refiners into Glimmers and keep going, making your land drops until you can eventually somehow get Ulamog into play, either by casting it or with Aetherworks Marvel. But in taking Tracker, Sam was hoping that Brad would just draw lands for a few turns and not really push his game plan forward.
So here comes Obnixilis Reignited. It looks like Brad is lining up a Glimmer of Genius in response, potentially to find Censor.
Sam's plan didn't work, by the way. He found Rogue Refiner and then Glimmer a turn later, so he's getting to see all the cards he needs.
Oh, and of course, Censor wouldn't actually work thanks to Rishkar's ability with that Walking Ballista. So Brad might be looking for a Negate instead, if he has such things in his board here, or in his deck after board. Sam also did play Rishkar into that Confiscation Coup, and Brad ended up deciding not to take Rishkar. So there's a bit of counterplay there when both players know about this effect. Funnily enough, Brad did find the Censor. It is in his hand right now, but not effective because of that Walking Ballista.
Good looking at by both players there. I could easily see myself just, making a mistake and casting Censor when I see no lands untapped on the opponent's side. But Brad's not going to fall for it.
Brad does have Ulamog in hand, and with Shrine of the Forsaken Gods in play, it's not that far from actually being able to cast Ulamog. He's effectively at 7 mana. Once he plays a few more lands and the Shrine activates, then he's going to be able to get to 10. So Sam does have a bit of a clock here when it comes to that. And that Rogue Refiner attacks Obnixilis. Sam opts to just let Obnixilis get hit for 3.
It means that Sam feels comfortable just using Obnixilis' +1 ability for a long-term advantage. He doesn't feel like he necessarily has to go for something like the Emblem.
And here comes that Confiscation Coup, targeting Rishkar Pima Renegade. So Sam gets to untap with a Walking Ballista, an Obnixilis on 3, a decent amount of options, especially given that once he ticks Obnixilis up, he gets to draw an additional card, which he does. What is Sam looking to do this turn?
Add another threat to the board. He wants a creature that, for the most immediate impact, is capable of blocking the 3-power attackers and protecting Ob Nixilis. In the slightly longer run, he wants something that can successfully start attacking Brad.
So he's going to start with a Rishkar Pima Renegade, again as a 3/3, and moving that Ballista up to a 3/3. And followed up with a Dispossess. Now he can, in fact, get countered by Censor if Brad elects to do so. And it looks like Brad's thinking about whether or not he wants to counter this.
What's interesting about this play is this is much different from, the turn 3 Dispossess that we've seen in some other games this weekend, because Brad is actually getting close to the range where he can just cast Ulamog for 10 mana. He does have a Shrine of the Forsaken Gods hidden in that stack of lands there, so 8 mana already.
And with the Rishkar that he's stolen, he's actually at 9 if Sam chooses not to kill Rishkar. So Brad is 1 land away from casting Ulamog here. So he, in fact, just lets Dispossess resolve. He could have countered it with Censor. Instead, it looks like he is going to likely cycle the Censor and try to hit additional lands here.
Giving himself 2 shots at that untapped 10th mana, as you mentioned.
Do you feel that Sam is obligated to use Walking Ballista to kill Rishkar in this situation?
Yes, I do. If he doesn't, his Ob Nixilis is going to take more damage also. So those are, that's in the good case scenario where he crosses his fingers and hopes Brad doesn't hit an untapped 10th mana. Rishkar can still attack Ob Nixilis. So I think those are 2 good reasons for Sam to go ahead and just kill it right away.
Yeah, the threat of Ulamog is fairly large.
Good timing by Sam.
Yep. He waits to see whether Brad cycles Censor. Brad does, and then Walking Ballista trades for Rishkar. So Confiscation can be traded for Rishkar and a Walking Ballista. Fairly solid trade. Sam repeatedly letting Ob Nixilis get pummeled by that Rogue Refiner.
Yeah, I wonder why Sam's declining to trade.
It's possible he values the mana ability from Rishkar higher. Like he doesn't want to trade down a 3/3 that taps for mana into a 3/2. He also knows that Brad has an Ether Meltdown in hand, so he could still trade Rishkar for Ether Meltdown in that case. Sam does continue to tick up Ob Nixilis. He's drawn 3 extra cards off that so far. He Delirium to traverse the Ulvenwald. Looks like Sam's getting a Virtuous Gearhulk. There are currently no creatures in Standard that let you take a card out of your opponent's hand, huh? No Tide Hollow Sculler type effect.
The best bet would be Distended Mindbender, but not a card that Sam has access to.
That would have been powerful here, but you are right. He's going for, looks like his most powerful card, Virtuous Gearhulk. Putting all the counters on Rishkar and attacking for attempted 7, ended up going to be 3 after the Ether Meltdown. And Sam's now just resigned for if Brad has an untapped land, then Ulamog is coming down.
Oh!
And it looks like he drew a Tune with Ether. Not the first time we've seen this tournament. When you need an untapped land and for Ulamog and you draw a Tune, it is always kind of brutal.
But it's still a tough spot for Sam. He really needs to find Transgress the Mind if he's going to continue playing this game.
So Sam has another Traverse, so he can get another Virtuous Gearhulk, and he found the Transgress.
He found it. Wow, so the Marvels are cleaned out of Brad Nelson's deck, and the Ulamog now cleaned out of his hand. He's just really drawing to a small handful of cards to get him back in this game. Huge swing that transgressed the mind.
Looks like we're setting up for a game 3 here, Sam. Traversing the Ovalwald, finding 2 Grimflayers, and that'll do it. It looks like Brad is going to scoop them up. Sam had a lethal attacks on the next turn, and that transgressed the mind. It was very, very timely. That'll send these players to a game 3 here.
Yeah, Luis, the unsung hero of that game, I think, was Obnixilis Reignited. It didn't really do anything too flashy, didn't destroy any big creatures, but it just sat in play for 4 or 5 turns, giving Sam extra draw steps, and right at the crucial moment, he was able to find Transgress the Mind.
Doing a live look in here. We're in game 3 of the match that we saw conclude earlier. Timothy Ealey against William Craddock here, and Temur Marvel.
When last we looked in, William Craddock had won game 1, which makes me think that it was probably a very quick Ulamog in game 2 to tie up the score in favor of Timothy Ealey.
Well, unfortunately for Timothy Ealey, his lands showed up early, did not show up late. He's on two mana here, facing down Glorybringer, Rogue Refiner, Servant of the Conduit, and Channel Initiate. And that'll do it. Looks like William Craddock is going to advance to 11-2. So these players have gained some information about their opponent's sideboarding based on that game 2. Brad got to see Transgress and Dispossess. Not huge surprises. Sam got to see Ether Meltdown and Confiscation Coup. There's a chance that impacts how they sideboard going into game 3.
You know, the presence of a card like Obnixilis in Sam Pardee's deck after sideboarding is really a testament to the complexity of this matchup, because at face value you would think that it's just a classic, sort of combo control versus beatdown matchup where Sam wants to attack and kill Brad as quickly as possible. But Obnixilis is a very slower reactive card, actually allowing Sam to play a long game and win a long game against Brad in that game.
Yeah, those extra 4 cards or so that he drew got him to that Transgress on that critical turn, and fueled out his threats earlier as well.
If you can count on taking away the Ulamogs and Marvels via Transgress the Mind and Dispossess, it really changes the texture of the match, and that allows you, if you want, to play a long game against the Marvel deck where you really would not want to do so in game 1.
Once you take out those the set of powerful cards, or at least mitigate them, Sam's deck, it has better threats than Brad's in general. Grimflayer, outclasses Rogue Refiner and whatnot. You also have the option of leaving Brad with somewhat like useless Woodweaver's Puzzle Knots. It looks like you cited out some number of those cards, but that's the kind of card that enables the energy mechanic, but if your Marvels are dispossessed, then Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot is not very effective.
That's the eternal game plan of, black-green mid-range decks, because they tend to be the best out there at playing fair games of Magic. So step 1 is just somehow force your opponent to play that fair game of Magic with you, and then everything falls into place from there. So
I'm going to see Brad on the play here, going into game 3. And we've got a new Ulamog. We also have a Tune with Ether, kicking things off the way that Marvel always wants to, and a Rogue Refiner. So a decent hand, but not on the high end of the range.
Where in game 1, Aetherworks Marvel is most certainly the card you're happiest to see in your opening hand, the namesake and build around of the deck. In post-sideboard in this matchup, you'd rather have it be like, the 10th, 11th card of your library so that it's protected from discard spells. So I like that Brad has, I like his position in keeping a hand like this, because all the framework is in place if the top of his library delivers, and that's really what he's going to need any way you look at it.
So Sam's Grimflayer is followed up by Grasp of Darkness, killing Brad's Rogue Refiner, so that'll give Sam an opportunity to hit with this Grimflayer, look at his top 3, and potentially set up Delirium, aided by this Evolving Wilds he sacrificed.
Good sequencing, sacrificing the Evolving Wilds first. You don't want to have to mess up your top of your library after you scry good cards to the top with Grimflayer's ability.
And Sam chooses to put Grimflare and 2 lands into the graveyard. So not quite at Delirium. He's got land, instant, and creature, but getting close. The cards continue to flow for Brad. He's got Rogue Refiner and Glimmer of Genius in hand, so he's going to get to see a lot of new cards over the next couple turns. That amount of card draw seems like it makes it difficult for Sam to win an attrition battle, win a fair game.
Right. I think he really wants to pair a fast start with a well-placed disruption spell rather than actually settling in for the long game.
Sam just Grimflare just flaying the top of his deck, throwing a Nissa, Voice of Zendikar, and a land into his graveyard, as well as a Dissenter's Deliverance.
He did achieve Delirium there.
So for the first time this match, Nissa, Voice of Zendikar resolves, and Sam's going to get a plant on the board. All right, Brad has Glimmer. Let's see if he can find Aetherworks Marvel. He's got up to the requisite 6 energy. He's not been disrupted so far.
Did you catch what he did with the Scry there?
He left looks like an Aetherworks Marvel on top and put a card on the bottom, and he's got a Marvel. He's able to spin this now.
It's usually the best play you have access to when you can do that. We've noticed different Marvel players with different play patterns once they have the active Marvel out. Brad has usually erred on the side of passing and activating on the opponent's turn, which I have to say I like, giving the opponent the smallest amount of information to make decisions with, and here we go.
Well, Brad will be prompted to activate it based on these Dissenter's Deliverance, but here's Ulamog, and that is going to make things very difficult for Sam. Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger, gets a cast trigger now here, and looks like Brad is going to take out Nissa and Grimflare, and just Sam's had enough. So that will do it. Brad Nelson successfully spins Marvel into Ulamog on turn 5 in games 1 and 3, actually, and he defeats Sam Pardee. So Brad moves to 13-0, our only undefeated player, and now mathematically locked for top 8 with a tournament of this size, I believe.
Yeah, we'll pencil him in there and figure out over the next 2 rounds who the other 7 players will be joining him.
Sam drops to 11-2, still in great shape. If he can win his next round, he can presumably draw his last round, or at least have the opportunity to draw. And he's used up one of his 2 losses. You only have 2 to give if you want a top 8 these days. And Sam's got to go ahead and win his next round if you would like to join, presumably, Brad in the top 8. So that'll do it for this round. And we've got some messages. We'll be back after those. To the booth here at Grand Prix Omaha. Luis Scott Vargas here with Reed Duke. We got to see Brad Nelson defeat Sam Pardee. A little help from Ulamog there. Turn 5 on games 1 and 3. But we've got more magic for you. There will be no Ulamogs in this match. We can guarantee that. We've got a time walk match. We've got Steve Rubin playing black-green Constrictor against John Stern playing mono-black zombies. So let's go ahead and take a look at how this match goes. We've got Steve Rubin there on the left, John Stern on the right. Both players at 10 and 2. So the loser will be eliminated from top 8 contention. The winner will have a win and in next round.
I find this to be a close and interesting matchup. The zombies are a bit worse individually than the creatures in black-green. However, the more creatures enter the battlefield on both sides, the more the zombies, grow exponentially and have the ability to overwhelm the black-green player.
And well, we've got some synergy on Steve Rubin's side. He's led with turns 2 and 3 Winding Constrictors against John Stern's Crypt Breaker, which means that if Steve has a way to distribute some +1/+1 counters over the next turn or two, he could be pretty explosive as well.
Like a Nissa Voice of Zendikar, for example.
Or a Rishkar Pima Renegade,
Yep.
Both of which are featured in his hand prominently.
That'll be a good decision for Steve to have to make. I'm not sure which he'll choose, but either one just looks like it'll be fantastic.
John Stern, meanwhile, fixing his mana of sorts with Crypt Breaker. He's discarded Relentless Dead to make a zombie token because he's on Westvale Abbey and Swamp, and actually double Westvale Abbey. So just because you're a monocolored deck doesn't mean you're impervious to Mana Screw. And he follows it up with a 3/3 Diagraph Colossus thanks to that discarded zombie. Crypt Breaker at the ready. Looks like John Stern's going to be drawing an extra card here.
In addition to Nissa Voice of Zendikar and Rishkar Pima Renegade, one of the best cards for Steve to find here would be Walking Ballista, combined with the Constrictors and additional ways to put counters on it. It could just start machine gunning down John Stern's, at least his more fragile zombies like Crypt Breaker.
Steve's got a lot of options here. He's got 2 copies of Fatal Push and Never to Return, so he's got a very interactive and powerful hand. Looks like he's going to go with Rishkar, putting 3 +1/+1 counters on each of the Winding Constrictors.
Yeah, so the only real block that John could try to make here is to triple block one of the Winding Constrictors, having him lose 2 zombies of Steve Rubin's choice. Otherwise, he could take 10, which doesn't sound too great, or he could start chump blocking, which doesn't sound too great. I mean,
all of these options don't sound too great.
Really caught between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, it looks like John's just opting to take the full 10 here, which might turn into 11 at the end of the turn. And it does. It looks like he did use Crypt Breaker to draw an extra card there.
So, I mean, Steve has been able to put his key creatures already outside the range of Dark Salvation, which would ordinarily be one of John Stern's best ways to come back in this spot. And based on the way the first few turns played, it didn't seem like he had Fatal Push.
And John is, in fact, only playing 2 Fatal Pushes that would be quite good here, but like you said, not as likely that he has those right now.
Especially since you and I know that Steve has Nissa as a follow-up here, it's going to be really hard to fight these Winding Constrictors with creatures in combat.
And it looks like John elected to tap 2 Swamps in a Westvale Abbey for that Lord of the Accursed, so he's making it very clear that Fatal Push is not a card he has access to.
Yeah, even if he doesn't have it in his hand, he should have left a Swamp open in case he could, use Crypt Breaker and draw into it at instant speed.
So Lord of the Accursed also brings with it a tapped zombie token thanks to the Diagraph Colossus, but despite having a Lord out and making all the zombies +1/+1, John's creatures are much smaller than Steve's, and if that Nissa is the play next turn, that will continue to be the case.
John, I guess, thinking if he can get in with any of his zombies, but it doesn't seem like racing is the way he's going to win this game.
Oh, and there's that Walking Ballista. So the interaction with Walking Ballista and Winding Constrictor is interesting. If Steve plays Walking Ballista for X equals 1, it'll enter the battlefield as a 3/3, thanks to the 2 Winding Constrictors. And of course, any counter he puts on it is multiplied or added, which has good synergy with a lot of the cards in his deck.
Steve just has it all here. He has Walking Ballista, he has Nissa, he has cheap black removal spells. Note also that he has the option to use Winding Constrictors for green mana, though they are pretty good attackers at 5/6s. It'll be cool to see what he chooses out of all these great options.
If Steve wants to tap down some of his creatures, he can play both Walking Ballista and Nissa, Voice of Zendikar this turn. He could end up with a 6/6 Walking Ballista if he so chose.
Yeah, and then 4 counters off of that could kill Lord of the Accursed and Crypt Breaker. That looks like a good option to me.
Steve also leaving up Fatal Push mana here. So Steve dealing 1 to Crypt Breaker, dealing 1 to Zombie Token, dealing another Zombie Token. None of them die because Lord of the Accursed still in play, but then thanks to Revolt off that Walking Ballista, Steve is then going to follow it up with a Fatal Push, targeting the Lord of the Accursed, which when it dies will take the Crypt Breaker and the Zombie Token with it.
Wow, Steve found a great play here because this kills 3 creatures without tapping the Winding Constrictors, and that's going to force a chump block from Diregraph Colossus.
And thanks to Rishkar, it looks like it's actually just straight up lethal, and that'll send these players into game 2. Wow, that had to be the Winding Constrictor nut draw, right? That was just the best, one of the best draws this deck is capable of.
Definitely.
Steve on the mulligan for game 2 here, and John Stern starts with a Dread Wanderer. Slightly slower start from Steve this time. Turn 2 Traverse and 2 Enter the Battlefield tapped lands.
But he may have, in a way, somewhat foiled John Stern there because John passed with 2 black mana open on turn 2, indicating, very likely to have Grasp of Darkness or Fatal Push. And Steve didn't give him an opportunity to use his mana by playing a creature into that 2 black mana.
So John's turn 2 nothing was followed up with a turn 3 Lord of the Accursed, enabling an attack for 3 with Dread Wanderer.
Steve is going to get on the board this turn. Somehow he can choose between Winding Constrictor or Tireless Tracker.
And it looks like he's just opting for Tireless Tracker, kind of disregarding the prospect of a removal spell.
Yeah, you often see players wait till turn 4 so they can get the clue right away the turn they cast Tireless Tracker, but in this case, Steve feels like he's a little bit behind. He just needs to use his mana as effectively as possible over the course of the next couple turns.
Second Lord of the Accursed coming out for John Stern, enabling an attack with both zombies, threatening 7 points of damage.
Steve may have to just block, take a little bit of the pressure off.
Trading Tireless Tracker for Dread Wanderer, not likely part of Steve's initial game plan here. Gonti, Lord of Luxury, comes out, and a 2/3 Death Touch Body, pretty effective when a lot of the creatures are just attacking on the ground.
Oh no! 4 basic swamps.
Not the most powerful or luxurious of Gonti selections. Yeah, basic swamp doesn't sound luxurious at all. I feel like Steve could demand a refund there. Five mana here. A Dark Salvation, X equals 2. Putting 8 power on the board and killing your opponent's creature seems like a pretty good play.
Yeah, that was a huge swing. Dark Salvation, one of the greatest appeals of playing this zombie deck, and the strongest card it has access to in these creature mirrors.
And that will do it. John Stern defeats Steve Rubin in Game 2. This player's heading to Game 3 here.
2 very one-sided games so far.
I think that the losing player did not deal a point of damage in either game.
You see Steve, at least on the draw, has sideboarded out Grim Flayer. I think he recognizes that the creature draws he wants to have are the ones built around Winding Constrictor. Having to fight the zombies with actual 2/2 and even 4/4 creatures is a tough way to do it.
Now that Steve is back on the play, do you think there's a higher likelihood that those Grim Flayers get in the deck?
Yeah, at least a small number. He wants to have enough 2-drops that he can feel comfortable having one in his opening hand. Though, even on the play, I wouldn't name Grim Flayer as one of his best cards.
As you say that, Steve puts like one Grim Flayer back in his deck.
Especially when he has Nissa, Voices of Zendikar, Rishkar, Pima Renegade, and Verdurous Gearhulk. Those are all cards that just incentivize you to have bodies on the table as quickly as possible, even if they're not the best, the best creatures in their own rights.
Steve checking that he's got his sideboard configuration as he wants it.
So I would assume that Steve more or less has maximum amount of spot removal in his deck, and then the maximum amount of Winding Constrictors and cards that are really good with Winding Constrictor.
Hoping to replicate his Game 1 draw, where it's Constrictor into Rishkar for a fairly one-sided game, as you said. So, looking at both these players' sideboard, it looks like Dispossess has pretty firmly defeated Lost Legacy as the 3-mana sideboard, like kind of cranial extraction slot of choice.
I much prefer Dispossess to Lost Legacy. There's the one flaw of Lost Legacy that even if you take Ulamog, the opponent can still just beat you in a fair and square game if they're able to activate Aetherworks Marvel for value a couple turns in a row. Just every turn spotting your opponent a free Rogue Refiner or Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot. That's still tough to slog through. It's Aetherworks Marvel sort of serves as a planeswalker in that way. And then the clause that doesn't allow you to decimate your opponent's hand with Lost Legacy, being able to just get lucky and knock a Marvel out of the opponent's hand when you cast Dispossess, that's a huge appeal of the card for me, especially when it lines up so conveniently that you're usually casting it right before the opponent hits 4 mana. But Lost Legacy, it's, your opponent wants to cycle their Ulamogs if they draw them early.
Right. And you can opt to not take Ulamog, but then you're casting a card that is just quite ineffective.
Yeah, guaranteed to be card disadvantages. That's the main strike against Lost Legacy. You can never have a profitable exchange with it in just a counting card advantage sense.
Of course, in this matchup, neither card is a role player, so we're going to see a lot more creatures and creature removal, just like Magic was meant to be played. Kicking things off, Steve on the play here. And he's got a 2-drop because he is facing down a 1-drop. John Stern with a Dread Wanderer.
No, slow starts for Steve Rubin in both games 2 and 3.
It does look like Steve has a nice controlling hand. I see Liliana the Last Hope and Yahenni's Expertise, I believe. So he's going to be able to kind of have John Stern overcommit and then end up sweeping the board.
Yeah, both those cards are going to be excellent here. Steve has some navigating to do. He has a Fatal Push that he could use at the end of the turn, and one appeal of that is that he could then cast Liliana the Last Hope and have her survive. Otherwise, he could Liliana one of the 2/1s and just cross his fingers that John Stern does not have Lord of the Accursed, but that's not exactly what you want to be doing.
So it looks like Steve will fire off that Fatal Push, taking out a Dread Wanderer, and follow up with Liliana. Killing the other Dread Wanderer, leaving John Stern with a lone Crypt Breaker.
Normally, Crypt Breaker is one of the most dangerous cards out of the zombie deck, and I would go far out of my way to kill it. But Steve has set up a fairly perfect situation here where John has only a lone Crypt Breaker, so it would be very difficult for him to cast 2 untapped zombies this turn and draw a card. And even if John is able to do that, Steve has Yeheni's Expertise to clean up the mess.
So a 4/4 Diregraph Colossus from John's turn, which not out of the range of Steve's removal spells, though, thanks to Yeheni's Expertise combining with Liliana the Last Hope.
Wow, that's great.
Unfortunately for Steve, he had a big opportunity here if he drew like a 2 or a 3 drop to play it for free off Yeheni's Expertise, but it doesn't look like he's got any good options there.
Well, yeah, he has an additional copy of Liliana, so if he wanted to do something like minus the first one and then cast a new Liliana off Yeheni's Expertise, he could do that, but I never really liked the play of just minus 2ing Liliana blind and hoping to get lucky.
He's also got a Walking Ballista, which is not the most effective off Expertise, and a Traverse the Ovenwald without Delirium right now. Looks like Steve is leaning towards the play of just casting Expertise first.
Do you think he should cast Traverse the Ovenwald here?
I would be inclined not to.
Walking Ballista alone can give him Delirium once that hits the graveyard.
And Steve is fairly close, even just like Liliana, potentially. So that Traverse looks like it'll do some work later. Gonti, Lord of Luxury from the other side this time, John's turn. Slightly better option than 4 Swamps.
Yep. More luxurious this time. John's turn actually gets to decide something.
Wow, that's lucky.
I didn't get a look at the full 4 cards, but I did see at least one Fatal Push, which that's one of the cards I'm most looking for when I cast a card like Gonti, because you invest a lot of mana up front for the Gonti, and then Fatal Push plus another spell the following turn to recoup the tempo disadvantage. That's just a really nice recipe in my book.
Gonti's somewhat blunted by Liliana's -2, -1 effect. But still a solid play here.
I think this zombie matchup is one of the biggest reasons the Black-Green Constrictor players have chosen to put Liliana in their deck. You wouldn't really think of Liliana the Last Hope being a great card against Aetherworks Marvel, but being able to pick off the Crypt Breakers and the smaller creatures of zombies is a great appeal of having a card like that.
Winding Constrictor, a turn too late to come into play for free. It still just gets cast and enables a 2/2 Walking Ballista for just 2 mana for Steve Rubin.
Yeah, I actually think that was one of the best draws Steve could have had for that turn. It just lines up really nicely with the amount of mana he had, pairs with the Walking Ballista, and I think it's just one of the strongest cards in the matchup in general.
Steve also ticking up towards Ultimate on -7 on Liliana. Doesn't seem unreasonable that he can protect Liliana with his Ballista, his other blockers, removal spells, and just get to the point where he starts making zombies every single turn.
So John's going to have some nice options here, especially if he did decide to take Fatal Push with the Gonti. That's a great way to take care of Winding Constrictor, and he could either add a threat or play another removal spell. Problem is he's still far away from being able to attack Liliana the Last Hope successfully, since his Gonti is a 0/2 creature based on her ability.
So John chose to pass the turn without playing anything, and it looks like he stopped Steve on his upkeep in order to cast a Fatal Push here. So it's interesting that he chose upkeep.
It looks like he's trying to trick Steve into investing mana in the Walking Ballista. I think John Stern probably has an additional Fatal Push. Another great reason to do it on the upkeep is now the Liliana's minus effect has worn off. So if Walking Ballista does wind up biting the dust, he can't kill Gonti in response.
So Steve has to decide whether he does want to spend this 4 mana. This is a good play from John Stern here.
I think Steve should definitely not tap his mana. I think it seems to me that that's what John Stern wants him to do.
Always be wary of your opponent giving you more options. And Steve just does let Fatal Push resolve.
And there's the other Fatal Push. Still in Steve Rubin's upkeep. I think he should shoot Gonti for 2 and finish it off with the Liliana. You forecasted that maybe Liliana getting up to 7 counters would be important in this game, and I agree. Particularly, Steve still does have a stacked hand, so he has other things to spend his mana on rather than using the -2 ability of Liliana to rebuy creatures from the graveyard.
Especially thanks to that Traverse now deliriumed successfully, thanks to Walking Ballista, Fatal Push, and Gehenny's expertise. So Steve also drew a Walking Ballista for his turn. So he has some good options. Decent chance he kicks things off by Liliana plussing on Gonti. Looks like he's going to opt to minus.
Mm-hmm.
So he's -2 Liliana, milled for 2, picking up a Winding Constrictor. And then playing a Ballista, which will enter with 2 counters, and then he'll use 1 to shoot down the Gonti.
That works, but I would rather have 3 extra loyalty on my Liliana.
That would leave you with essentially another threat in play against a zombie deck that may not even have... looks like no never to returns even in John Stern's deck list here.
And man, this is a tough way for John Stern to do it against 2 cards that can almost for free pick off 1 toughness creatures. The best move he can make is spending 6 mana for 2 tapped Dread Wanderers.
Steve happy to oblige, using Liliana's plus ability to give Dread Wanderer -2/-1, and follow things up with a Nissa Voice of Zendikar. Her -2 is going to give 2 +1/+1 counters to both the Winding Constrictor and the Walking Ballista, opening the door for a pretty hefty attack here.
Yeah, Steve's going to hit for...
For 3.
Okay, so he wants to block and protect his planeswalkers. He could have just used a single counter off of the Walking Ballista if he wanted. But from where I'm sitting, there's no decision tree that leads to Steve losing here. He can almost activate any ability on any of the cards he has in play, and it's going to be really good for him.
Steve has the check mark next to his name here. And barring a very unforeseen sequence of events, Steve Rubin will be advancing to 11-2, John Stern dropping to 10-3 since. Despite the synergy of the zombie deck, Steve did a very good job of killing the cards he needed to kill. You see a Crypt Breaker, Diregraph Colossus, both cards that kind of power the zombie deck, and Dread Wanderer not as impressive by itself.
I find it cool that Steve Rubin won Game 1 and Game 3 in such wildly different ways. Game 1 was just a fast beatdown with oversized creatures, and Game 3, he didn't even play a creature until turn 5 of the game. He used removal spells and Liliana, the Last Hope, to manage the zombies.
We're going to start attacking with Dread Wanderer here. And after all that, Steve then uses the Walking Ballista to take out the Dread Wanderer. walking Ballista and Winding Constrictor, sending in for 6, but regardless of life totals here, John Stern is going to have an incredibly difficult time coming back in this game. Liliana's -2 picks up another Walking Ballista, which now is going to enter the battlefield as a 3/3. Maybe Steve wanted a 12-sided die on that Walking Ballista. You never know how big it's going to get.
Okay, Steve Rubin takes it.
And that'll do it. Steve Rubin defeats John Stern, and looks like Plants vs. Zombies, the Plants won this time. So Steve Rubin, 1 win away from having potentially the opportunity to draw into top 8, depending on the pairings, and John Stern looking like he might have to settle for a 3-point finish if he wins his next 2 rounds. He's got 12-3 as his best record. So we'll be back with more Magic. We've got some messages for you, and we'll see you shortly.